Hurricane Sandy. And so now it's just been a matter of trying to reprobate that property and getting those things back in order. And then I've been dealing with Friends of Like It Is, a media rights organization that we formed in order to deal with censorship and how our people are stigmatized in the media. So I've had a full slate of work to be done. I'm just fortunate that I've been able to do it and be able to find some means of support in the meantime, because I've pretty much been barred from the workforce. So it's been necessary for me to not only do those kinds of things, but in order to liberate our people, but also find some ways for me to be able to survive.
Ashe. Baba Maddox, if you would be so kind, just give the little listening audience a backdrop of how it was that the New York legislature illegally prevented you from practicing law in New York.
Well, what happened was one of the things that prosecutors do, and that's one of the big problems we have. When I go in a courtroom, I see all prosecutors as enemies of black people. So I'm not one of those lawyers who have ever engaged in any kind of plea bargaining at all. If you indict my client, we're going to fight it out in a courtroom, and we're going to see who is the better person. And so with that attitude, my whole position has always been non-negotiable, and so I created a lot of dislikes from prosecutors all over the state of New York in 62 counties, as well as the New York State Attorney General's office, all of whom are against black people. And so they found that as I was pursuing Tawana Brawley and the culprits who had raped her and was getting close to not only proving that they did rape her, which I did do, and that's a matter of public record. People, before they make any comments on Tawana Brawley, need to go to the court record and look at the record. It's right there in the file that a nearly all-white jury found that Steve Pagonis was one of the attackers of Tawana Brawley. Now, these are white people. And they said afterwards that they knew something had happened to her and that their verdict spoke for itself, and it was Steve Pagonis. Of course, since we don't control the media, that kind of information is hard to get out, and we have the black press, which sometimes, unfortunately, kowtow to the interests of white supremacy. And so people never know that. And so I became a very marked person and became the only lawyer in the history of this country to have ever been barred by a legislative body in what is called a bill of attainder, which when this Constitution was written, the so-called founding fathers found at that time that would be an illegal, unconstitutional practice in America. It had been a practice that had been used in England in which a legislative body would find somebody distasteful and they would move against that person. Well, here, the New York legislature found that my work was distasteful and was not in the interest of white supremacy, and that I took a no-holds-barred position on issues that affected my people. And so they just went roughshod after me. And because more than anything else, it was hard for me to teach our people what the law is, because that's one of the real problems that we have, is that we really don't know what our rights are. I mean, I know that Chief Justice Roger Taney said no Negro has any rights that a white man is bound to respect. I understand that. But the concept of rights was in existence in ancient Egypt more than 1,000 years before the Magna Carta was ever discovered in England. And so, it's hard for me to see black people now who don't appreciate the concept of rights and the duties and responsibilities of the state in terms of enforcing those rights. And those kind of things that we really have to get back to, because if you don't believe that you have a right, then you won't fight for it. In the same way as if I gave somebody a Mercedes-Benz and it was clearly titled to that person, and then later somebody else said, well, I want your Mercedes-Benz. Well, if you actually believe that you own a Mercedes-Benz, most of us would probably die trying to protect our right to ownership. And so we have to see the same thing about rights. Whatever Taney may have said in Dred Scott, we know that Taney himself was totally unaware of the fact that the people he said had no rights were the people that actually had created those rights in the first place, and we must understand that and must fight to enforce it.
Right, Pop. Well, that was that was definitely. I'm glad that the sister asked you that question, because that was definitely an important question for the people, just to get context on exactly what was going on, and especially the point of the Dred Scott case, because a lot of our people. That's one of the things that I've taken from you as a lesson, just going through the lectures that I've seen you do, and knowing that was a point that I've even heard you say that we should have the Dred Scott decision in our pocket at times to make sure we understand who we are as a people in this country. And saying that, right now, we got we have a context of protest, a lot of anger going on in the African community. From your point of view, how do you see what's going on with the protesting? Or now we have the media hyping it up with these officers who have been shot. What do you see the people going, or how do you think that we should be perceiving some of these things that are going on, and what should our direction be as a people?
Well, one of the things that we do have to recognize that this is a long-standing grievance that we have against this country. And so the things that are happening here now are very appropriate, and we should not be subject to any suspension of constitutional rights while some people are claiming to be mourning. The unfortunate part is that it's usually some, quote, victim, close quote, who get access to the media, who then turns around and says, well, we all should get along. We shouldn't besmirch the name of Eric Garner or the name of Michael Brown in terms of our pursuing our rights. And my caveat to that is that I've been in this business ever since I was a teenager, and I've been fighting for my rights and the rights of others all of that period of time. And most of these people only pop up when something happened to them or some family member, and they're then in line to get hush money in order to act as though they just hit the lotto. And in getting that hush money, they don't make any move toward entering into a stipulation with the municipality or the state entity that if this kind of condition continues, then there will be other consequences. So we find that they're just simply going into these courts led by racial racketeers who use us as a people to go out and make some noise on their behalf, and then they run to the government and tell them that they can turn down the volume if they can get X number of dollars. And so we're dealing with a racket. We're dealing with racial racketeers in the same way that the New York Police Department is racketeering as well. So, this is what we have to do, is to begin to identify who the real enemies are and how we have to deal with them.
I definitely see that. Go ahead, Sister Camille. You got to.
No, was just in total agreement with Baba Maddox.
Now you're saying about those who are misleading us, and especially taking us down with this racial racketeering, which is something I'm going to definitely have to add to my lexicon, because one of the things that I'm seeing now is just the divide between a lot of the youth are moving in a direction away from the likes of brothers like, well, I'm hard to call him a brother, but Al Sharptongue, and how him, and we have, we've seen in Ferguson, Jesse Jackson get booed right up out of the place, but we have Al Sharptongue right now inside of New York, as though he is some type of overlord over what's happening to us as a community. Me myself, I think that we have to stray away from any type of leader thrust in front of us by media projection. But there's one more question that I have to ask. It's about this lawyer, Crump, who is it seems like the civil rights attorney for several different families who have had someone pass away, from the young brother from Atlanta who was found, Kendrick, who was found inside of the carpet in Atlanta. He was the lawyer for Trayvon Martin's family, the lawyer for Mike Brown's family, and now the lawyer for the young brother Rice, Tamir Rice family. And I'm just, as an attorney yourself, how does he get to all of those different things? How do you get involved in something like that, where you're there at every single place?
Well, let me give you a little history, because fortunately I have lived long enough to have seen a lot, and I like these opportunities now to be able to lay out some real history, a part of which constitutes a problem that we have, because we really don't record our history, and that's really unfortunate. But in June of 1987, at the House of the Lord Church in Brooklyn, there was a meeting of scores of activists from around the tri-state, and I was in that meeting, and the meeting did not pass the smell test as far as I was concerned, and so therefore the issue then was, how do we deal with Al Sharpton? Well, in my knowledge of how things were going on in New York at that particular time, I felt like Roy Ennis would have probably been a better subject at the moment, because at that time, we're talking about 1987, Al Sharpton wasn't too much on the radar screen, and Roy Ennis was. And so I figured that if we were going to really move, we ought to deal with the person who was in the pilot seat, rather than somebody who may have been a navigator or a trainee. And so I said then, and this is well documented, that the problem that we have in the black community is a lack of a code of ethics. And so we have not bound ourselves to each other. That's what ethics does. When you talk about religion, you talk about a one-on-one relationship with your creator. But ethics is different. Ethics is a one-on-one relationship with each other. So, ethics is about me binding myself to you, and not my being interested in what's going to happen in the afterlife, and whether I go to heaven or hell or wherever I may be en route to. And so I said then that we had to have a code of ethics. And I said that Al Sharpton is going to become bigger and bigger until we have that code of ethics, and that until we do have that code of ethics, people are going to begin to side with him, because you see, one of the things that Sharpton had was some other kind of support, and my position was, until we have a code of ethics and a Al Sharpton in a code of ethics, we're going to have these problems. And now we're talking about 2014 going in 2015, and Sharpton is still around. And many of the people who were there opposed to Sharpton in 1987 are allies of him today. And so, the problem is that we don't have a code of ethics. We're going to be into this whole thing of musical chairs and trading places. And ethics is the only thing that is going to stop us from moving around and changing our positions to the detriment of our people. And so there's no question about it that Sharpton is a real problem. The more difficult issue is, why don't we have a code of ethics like every other group does? I mean, if you go in any other community and you do something wrong, you go to the police. The community gonna take care of you. I mean, and that's become the question with Sharpton. Why, if he's the problem, then why aren't we just taking care of him and move on, and serve notice to the next person who think they want to be at Al Sharpton? What happens when that occurs?
I respect that because what you're saying is something that has happened. Like I said, when I seen it over there in Ferguson with the youth, where they booed Jesse, screamed Al down from a couple places, and the only places that he could go was where most of the more churched out type of people were at. They had to be really, really church-like. And I see that a lot of times what that does is it takes, nowadays it seems like religion and churches take the steam out of the movement more than push the fire, as to say, more than stoke the fire. Go ahead, brother.
No, it does, and I think one of the things that's hopeful right now, and I hope our young people, have acquired some lessons where they're moving in this way, in a very natural way. I mean, where it seems like whether they are getting it expressly or impliedly, they begin to realize that we have to turn to each other rather than turn against each other. And I think that is something that could be very wholesome in this whole struggle that we're engaged in right now.
Definitely. Yeah. I see the unity. I see the unity growing with this side of the movement and with this side of the youth. That's one of the main reasons I definitely wanted to have you on it, so some of the younger people who listen to the blog talks and things of that nature, they can hear what was going on. I got an echo going. Hold on.
Another one?
Yeah, I hear it. Let me make sure this echo is going. I got an echo. All right. Is it? Sister Camille, I think something's going on in your line making an echo. If you could check it, I'm going to put you right back on. But, yeah, family, we're going to definitely go to the lines. Brother Maddox, you got the lines filled up. People want to definitely ask you some questions. But I wanted to make sure, though, that you got into things about the UAM, about where the UAM is at, when you hosting, the things that you hosting there, because and also, if you could, just give me a little bit of history on the slave theater. How you started it and all that.
Well, actually, we started in 1988. It became an outgrowth of the struggle of Tawana Brawley, and after we was found the organization at Friendship in Brooklyn, somebody came up to us and said, well, there's a place right around the corner called the Slave Theater. And I reckon to some of the people from Brooklyn, they were aware at that particular time. I really wasn't. But I went over to see Judge John Phillips, who was the owner of that particular theater, as well as the owner of several other theaters in Brooklyn, and the owner of several apartment buildings. And so I had a conversation with Judge Phillips, and as a result of that conversation, we started meeting at the Slave Theater. And basically what our intention was at that time was to, one, make sure that we were not subject to censorship. And that is, we didn't care what other groups thought about Khalid Muhammad or Steve Coakley or anybody else. This was our place. We were financing, and we would call our own shots. And so that's how we started. We wanted Dr. Clark, John Henry Clark, or we wanted Dr. Ben, or whoever we wanted, who we thought was good for black people. We didn't care what other groups thought about those people. We were not concerned about whether somebody thought they were anti-Semitic, whether black folks should hear them or not. Our point was that we think that black people deserve the best information that they should receive. And so that was 1988. About 1994, Rudolph Giuliani and the Anti-Defamation League, along with some other people, sued us to try to stop us from excluding them from the slave, exclude us from having lectures which was African-oriented and did not concern about how other people felt about us as a people. And so we had to go to court and fight that, and eventually we did. We won. There were people who, said, well, they hate white people. This had nothing to do with hating white people. This had something to do with exercising rights. And under the First Amendment, there's something called a right to associations. And right to association means your right to associate with people of like minds. So, you don't need some white person to come in there to monitor what you're doing or saying, to show that you're all right and that you don't hate anybody. Well, you have a right to hate if that's what you want to do. And so that's how we really started the slave and just started bringing a whole host of people in there. And eventually just brought virtually anybody from around the world came to the slave theater. I mean, we brought them in from Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, the Caribbean. It didn't make no difference. We paid the freight, brought them in, and let them share with us the African experience.
Black power. I'm grateful to be able to, at this age, I'm 37. So at the time that the slave was going, I was still a real a youngster, not getting down there to New York in that mannerism. But I'm glad just to have the opportunity to watch the lectures on YouTube, watch and things of that nature, where it's some of the most powerful information and most impactful information that I've ever gotten. And actually, my daughter, who she's out right now, she just went to a Kwanzaa program, and she wanted to talk to you, but we forgot that we had a Kwanzaa program going on. But she's a homeschooler, and she wants to be an attorney. And I went to school and I actually was thinking of being an attorney, and I wish I had the likes of someone like you as a guide, because the people that I met who were attorneys were so low life, like it turned me totally away from wanting to even practice the craft of being an attorney or litigating law or anything of that nature. But my daughter wanted to be one, and your lectures are some of the it's like her classroom. I sit her down and let her go through it, and the papers that you write, the articles that are posted on Facebook, those things are critical to the people, and I'd like to just thank you for putting that information out. And to all the people who do get a chance to look at those lectures on YouTube, I'd like to thank you for them also.
Well, I want to thank you as well, and I think one of the things that I have as an advantage is that I sort of bridge the gap between the old and the new. I grew up in Georgia. There was a need at that particular time for us to teach our people, and we did with great glee. My mother was a school teacher herself, and she loved teaching. She loved to be with the people after school, and so it was just a way of life. It wasn't really a matter of trying to have a certain status. It was just a matter of trying to help each other, to improve each other. And I think that was so significant. And I really always thank her for really giving me those values that I have been able to keep.
Shay. Sister Camille, you got any questions?
Yes, I don't know if I'm sounding choppy and I have some problems with my line, but I wanted to, if Baba Maddox would be so kind to start a relationship, for lack of a better word at this time, between, well, let me give a little backdrop. I listened to Yatrice Lee because she has you on. And that's one reason why I apologize, because I used to listen to WBAI as a young, and they had an underground hip-hop show that I would tune into, and I found out about Yatrice Lee, thus hearing about you, and having the opportunity to record a lot of those interviews that y'all two had. I mean, to the family members, anytime you hear, first of all, we all should be listening to Yatrice Lee on PRN, but anytime she has Baba Maddox on there, you must do yourself a favor and tune in, because to hear two intellectual giants go back and forth and really historical masters in terms of our history and world history in general, it's a thing to listen to. But what I wanted you to elaborate on was where you had mentioned how Missouri, for example, has a culture of judicial racism, and it made me think about New York and looking at their history. New York, during our enslavement, during the 1800s, in particular 1800s, was definitely on the side of the Confederates. And you had that same thing with Missouri, and I think it's interesting to see the parallels of what's going on in the two states with the murdering, the state-sponsored or the government-sponsored assassination of our men.
Well, and that's a great point. And, and I like to just add something before I interject any further into it. I always say, because, everybody's saying about the things that you need as a lawyer, and I've said there are three things that I think a lawyer must have. They must have the equivalent of a baccalaureate degree in black history, the equivalent of a master's degree in legal history, and the equivalent of a doctorate degree in military science. Because when you go in that courtroom, it is a declaration of war. And if you're not aware that you are there to war, or if you are not aware that your game plan should not be one of copping a plea or selling a case, then you're just going to have to duke it out and let the best person win. And so I say that because when you look at Missouri and you look at the case of Dred Scott, what may be missing in some people's minds is the fact that here today you have the governor of New York, who is a Democrat. You have the governor of Missouri, who is a Democrat. And then you have Michael Brown out there coming after Dred Scott, who initiated this federal lawsuit because he had acquired so-called freedom. But what Dred Scott said is that until he was compensated for his work, he would never be free. And so he rejected the Missouri Supreme Court declaration that he was a free person, and he instead went into federal court under diversity of jurisdiction, meaning that if one citizen in one state sue another citizen in a different state, the federal court has jurisdiction of that particular claim. And so Dred Scott used that to get into federal court, and the person that he sued was his, quote, slave master who resided in New York. So that's how, so there's a real connection between Missouri and New York in so many different respects. And so